With me in prayer. Gracious God, our Father, we come today to say thank you and to say that we love you. We come, God, saying thank you for looking beyond all of our faults and then seeing and then supplying our every need. God, in these next remaining minutes, I pray, God, that you would give truth to your word. Pray, God, that you would give me clarity of mind and precision of speech. That even now, God, you know the frailty of my frame and my flesh. Pray now, God, that you would give so much added and much needed strength. God, thank you for this day of preaching. Do not take it for granted. It's in the sweet and sovereign name that we do pray, and all of God's people shout together, amen and thank God. Listen, I want to call your attention today to Psalm 27, and I want to read verses 1 through 3 in your hearing. Psalm 27, verse 1 says, "The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear? The Lord is the strength of my life. Whom shall I be afraid? When the wicked, even my enemies and my foes, came upon me to eat up my flesh, they stumbled and fell. Though an host should encamp against me, my heart shall not fear. Though war should rise against me, in this will I be confident." I want to honor this text with your prayers and certainly with the power of God. I want to honor this text from the thought, confidence for the rough spots in your life. Confidence for the rough spots in your life. My brothers and sisters, there comes a time in all of our lives when we will run into some rough spots. Because one thing about rough spots, and that is that they are inevitable. And since they are inevitable, we cannot bypass them. We cannot avoid them, but we simply have to endure them. Because in this text, David helps us to understand that we are able to face the rough spots in our lives with confidence, because we know that God is going to see us through whatever we are going through. Because I want to submit to someone here today that God uses the rough spots in our lives to strengthen our faith and fortify our love and commitment to Him. That's the sermon right there in one sentence, that God uses the rough spots in our lives to strengthen our faith and to fortify our love and commitment to Him. And so here it is in the text today. David says that if you are going to have confidence in the rough spots in your life, David says, first of all, it starts with having a personal assurance. Yes, David says if you're going to survive the rough spots in your life, he says it starts with having personal assurance. Because notice in verse number 1, it says, "The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear? The Lord is the strength of my life. Whom shall I be afraid?" Now, what I want you to see in the text, I want you to see the personal pronouns that David uses in this text. Because he says in verse number 1, he says, "The Lord is my light." He says, "The Lord is my salvation." He says, "The Lord is the strength of my life." Now, what David wants us to know and see in the text, that if we are going to survive the rough spots in our lives, David wants us to know it's only going to come by having personal assurance. Because notice, if you will, that David, he covers three areas in our lives that give us great concern. Because David says we can have confidence in God in the midst of our darkness. We can have confidence in God in the midst of our destruction. And we can have confidence in God in the midst of our defeat. Because David says, although I have faced many things in my life. He says, although I have faced many situations in my life, because he says there have been some times in my life when I was in the midst of darkness. He said there were times in my life when I was in the midst of destruction. He said there are times I find myself facing defeat. But David says the reason why I don't have to fear and the reason why I don't have to be afraid is because of the personal assurance of God. Because David says, regardless of what I go through, regardless of what issue I may have in my life, David says at the end of the day, he says, the Lord is my light. He says, the Lord is my salvation. And he says, the Lord is the strength of my life. Because I like what David says in verse number 1, because it's one thing to say God is light, but it's another situation, and even gives a different meaning when you're able to say God is my light. Because the shout of the text is this, is that not only does God give us salvation, but David says in the text, he says God is our salvation, which helps us to understand that no matter what we are facing in our lives, David wants us to know that God is a God that you can trust. Because what David does in the text is that while David is thinking about God and what God is to him, because notice the word that David uses to describe God in the Hebrew text, he uses the word Jehovah. Now, the word Jehovah in the Hebrew text, it means the self-existing one. That David is talking about the one that had no beginning and has no ending. And while David is reflecting upon who God is and what he has done, it causes David to reflect on a period in his life when he was outmanned, he was outnumbered, and he was surrounded by his enemies. Because he says there in verse number 2, he says, when the wicked, even my enemies and my foes, came upon me to eat up my flesh, he says they stumbled and they failed. Though an host should encamp against me, my heart shall not fear. Though war should rise against me, in this will I be confident. And so David, as he is reflecting upon God Jehovah, he remembers a time in his life when he was about to be taken out. Maybe he remembers his encounter with Goliath. Maybe he remembers his encounter with Absalom. Maybe he remembers his encounter with Saul. Maybe he remembers his situation in Ziklag. But David says, before they got to me and before they could devour me, David said they stumbled and they failed, because the shout of the text is that the trap that the enemy sets for you, it's really for them. And so David says, before they could get their hands on me, he said, God set a trap for them that caused them to stumble and fall, and they did not succeed. Because, and I suggest today, our confidence and our assurance in God, it comes from our experiences. Can I say that one more time? That our confidence and our assurance in God, it comes from our experiences, because our experiences teach us and allow us to see that the situation that we are facing is no match for the sovereignty of God. Because when you think about all of the things that God has done, when you begin to think about all of the things that God has brought you through, when you begin to think about the mountains that he moved, when you think about the victories that he won, when you think about the enemies that he destroyed, when you think about the sickness that he healed, when you began to think about God's divine portfolio, it gives you everything that you need to know that you're going to make it through whatever you are going through. Because that's why the seasoned saints would say there is no secret to what God can do. For what he has done for others, he will do the same thing for you. And so David says, in this, he says, in this will I be confident, because our confidence is in the fact that God is going to be and to meet our needs whenever we need him to meet. Because you will discover that God is all you need when you discover he's all that you have. So here it is in the text. Not only does David say, if you're going to have confidence in the rough spots in your life, not only does David talk about his personal assurance, but then he talks about his personal attainment. Y'all gonna help me here today. He talks about his personal attainment, because if you are going to survive the rough spots in your life, not only must you have personal assurance, but then you have to have personal attainment. Notice in verse number 4, he says, one thing that I have desired of the Lord, and that will I seek after, that I may dwell in the house of the Lord all the days of my life, to behold the beauty of the Lord, and to inquire in his temple. Here it is in the text, beloved, that David, in the text, he shares the secret to his confidence. Oh, yes, he does. He shares the secret to his confidence in God. And David says the secret to having confidence in God while you are facing the rough spots in your life. He said the secret to my confidence is to have communion with God. Because David says, he says, my greatest desire, he says, my greatest attainment is to be in the presence of the Lord. Because David said, that's one thing that I have desired, and that's one thing that I'm going to seek after. David says that this is something that I'm in constant pursuit each and every day in my life, and that is to dwell in the house of the Lord all the days of my life. Because please understand, child of God, that it is not the place that he desired to be in as much as it was the person that he desired to be with. Can I say that one more time? That it was not so much the place that he desired to be in as much as it was the person he desired to be with. And it was the person in the Lord's house that was the most important to him. Because David says, while you are dealing with some rough spots in your life, he says dealing with the rough spots in your life are not that bad as long as you can get in the presence of God. I want to tell you today that you can endure whatever you are going through as long as you are able to get in the presence of God. Because notice, David says in Psalm 16, he says, in thy presence there is fullness of joy and pleasures forevermore. That I want to suggest today that it is dangerous for us to confuse being in church with being in the presence of God. Can I say that one more time? That it is dangerous for us to confuse being in church with being in the presence of God, because I believe that one thing that COVID-19 has exposed about the church is that it has exposed the fact that we are more addicted to going to church than we are having a relationship with God. Because David says, he says, my number one goal in life is to simply be in the Lord's presence. Because he says, when I get in his presence, he says, I'm able to behold the beauty of the Lord. David says, he says, when I get into the presence of the Lord, he says, I'm not asking for anything. I'm not wanting anything. He says, I just want to be in the presence of the Lord. Because what you will discover, child of God, is that you will discover the more you focus on God, the less you focus on your problems. Can I say that just one more time? That when you learn how to focus more on God, you will begin to focus less on your problems. Because the word behold in the text, it means to gaze upon. It means to look upon. And so David says, he says, the more I gaze at God and his beauty, he said, that will cause me to only take a glimpse at my problems. Because David says, he says, the reason why I love being in the presence of the Lord. He says the reason why my number one goal in life and my number one attainment in this life is to be in the presence of the Lord, because he says I'm safe when I get in the Lord's presence. He said the reason why I don't have to fear, and the reason why I don't have to be afraid is because I'm safe whenever I get into the Lord's presence. Because he then says in verse number 5, he says, in the time of trouble, he said the Lord is he's going to hide me. David says in the text, he says, when I'm facing some rough spots in my life, he says the reason why I love being in the Lord's presence is because he says when I get in trouble, and he says, and when my enemies are trying to take me out, he says the reason why I love being in the presence of God, because he says the Lord knows how to hide me, and he knows how to protect me where my enemies cannot get to me. And isn't that good news to know today that God, he knows how to protect you? Because is there anybody here that when you began to look back in the rearview mirror of your life, is there anybody here that can testify that the Lord, he knows how to cover you, and he knows how to protect you when you find yourself in the time of trouble? Because David says, he says when I get in trouble, he said the reason why I don't have to worry, and the reason why I don't have to be afraid is because he says I'm able to find refuge. I'm able to find refuge in God. That David said, he says when you are in a time of trouble, he said you don't have to go looking for anything, or nor do you have to go looking for anybody else, because when we find taking refuge in other things, you will discover that that's only temporary. That when we find safety and security in other people, can I tell you that's only temporary. But having refuge in God is what you are going to need when you find yourself in some rough spots. And so as I close this morning, that David says, he says, if you are going to have courage, Yeah, in the midst of the rough spots in your life, he said, not only must you have personal assurance, not only must you have a personal attainment, but then he said, if you are going to have courage, have I got a witness in the midst of the rough spots in your life? He said, lastly, you're going to have personal adoration. Have I got a witness here? Because he's saying in verse number 6, he says, and now shall my head be lifted above all my enemies around about me. He said, therefore will I offer in his tabernacle sacrifices of joy, and I will sing, yea, I will sing unto the Lord. Have I got a witness here? Can I close today by saying that when you think about what the Lord has done, that when you think about how good the Lord has been, that when you think about how the Lord has spared your life, when you think about how the Lord he watched over you while it was storming and while it was raining, and when you think about how the Lord protected you from danger, seen and unseen, and when you began to take inventory of all of the things that the Lord has done for you, can I close today by saying that you have a personal obligation to lift your hands and open your mouth and give the Lord the best praise that you have, because that's why the songwriter says, when I think about the goodness of Jesus and all he's done for me, my soul ought to cry out, hallelujah. Is there anybody here that can thank God that you gotta thank you in your mind? Is there anybody here in Facebook land that's gotta thank you in their spirit? Is there anybody here that's gotta thank you in their mouth? That if you gotta thank you anywhere, that I tell you, it's a good place, it's a good time to let it out. Have I got a witness here? Because my mama taught me as a little boy, she said, when people have been nice to you, and when people have been good to you, and when people have gone out of their way to be nice to you, she said, boy, it's only right for you to tell them thank you. Is there anybody here that when you began to look back in the rearview mirror of your life, is there anybody here that can tell the Lord thank you? Thank you, because it could have been hours with no food and no place to sleep. But I got a roof. I got a little food. I got air. I got life. That's enough to tell God thank you. Tell him thank you. Tell him thank you. Tell him thank you because he's been so good. Tell him thank you because he's done so much. Tell him thank you because he brought you not just part of the way, but he brought you all the way. Say yeah. Say yeah. Tell him thank you because if you don't have a reason to tell him thank you, tell him thank you because he died. He did die. Tell him thank you because he rose. Well,